Hello and welcome back. Come in, sit down, get yourself properly comfortable. If you're already in bed, get the pillow exactly where you want it, pull whatever blanket you've got up to wherever feels right. If you're on the sofa with the lights off and your phone propped against something at a precarious angle, that works too. And if you happen to be somewhere slightly strange tonight, a guest room, a different city, a ceiling you don't yet know well, still fine. All ceilings work for this. Tonight we're going to talk about South Park, which I realize is a sentence that might give you pause because South Park is, and I say this with genuine affection, a show that has spent almost 3 decades arguing loudly that it should not be taken seriously. It has a small child die horribly in most of its early episodes as a running gag. It features a talking piece of Christmas poo as a recurring character. It once aired an episode with 162 uncensored uses of the word shit as a kind of experiment in what television would allow. It is, on the surface, built to be dismissed by anyone looking for depth. And that's partly why I find it so interesting when you dig into it, because underneath the chaos and the profanity and the celebrity parodies and the fart jokes and the episodes that are clearly just Parker and Stone processing something that annoyed them that week, underneath all of that, there are questions, real ones, questions about what it means to suffer when no one can witness your suffering, about whether something can be real if it only exists in imagination, about what cynicism does to a person once it takes root and grows, about the philosophy of creating things for personal gain, about whether you can satirize everything equally without that becoming its own kind of ethical position. South Park asks these questions. It rarely answers them cleanly. It usually wraps them in something crude enough that you can leave without noticing the question was there. But the questions are there, and spending an evening with them is, I think, a worthwhile thing to do. A few things to know before we begin. South Park premiered on August 13th, 1997 on Comedy Central, and as of the time of writing, it's aired 28 seasons and 338 episodes. It holds a $1.5 billion deal with Paramount Global that secures it through at least 2029 or 2030. It is, by most measures, one of the longest continuously running animated series in American television history. Trey Parker voices most of the main cast: Stan Marsh, Eric Cartman, Randy Marsh, Mr. Garrison, and somewhere upward of a dozen others. Matt Stone voices Kyle Broflovsky, Kenny McCormick, Butter Stotch, and most of the rest. The two of them have been the only showrunners the show has ever had. No handoffs, no writer's room that gradually took over while they moved on to other things. Whatever South Park is, it is the sustained, unbroken creative output of 2 specific people who have been thinking about the same fictional Colorado town for nearly 30 years. That matters for tonight, because one of the things that makes South Park philosophically interesting, rather than just philosophically adjacent, is that its ideas have continuity. Lore threads that were introduced in Season 3 paid off in Season 14. Character implications planted in Season 5 were excavated in Season 23. The show has a longer memory than it's usually given credit for, and the things it's been quietly thinking about across that time are genuinely worth examining. We're going to spend tonight on 9 of them, 9 ideas from the show's lore that have a philosophical weight to them, some of which were clearly intentional, some of which the show seemed to discover accidentally as it kept going. We'll move slowly through each one, spending time with it, and then gently put it down and pick up the next. There's no climax to build towards. The sections don't depend on each other. If you drift off somewhere in the middle, that's genuinely fine. These are modular. You can pick up wherever you surface. The 9 things we're covering are, roughly, the philosophy of Kenny McCormick's death and what it means to suffer without witnesses. The nature of evil in Eric Cartman and whether it has a limit, the Imagination Land trilogy and the question of whether imagination confers a kind of reality, Stan Marsh's depression and what it says about cynicism as a way of life, Randy Marsh and the philosophical problem of the man who can never quite decide to be an adult. The man-bear-pig arc and what it means for a satirical show to admit it was wrong. Butters and the weight of staying good in a world designed to make that difficult. South Park's equal opportunity philosophy and what it cost in practice. And the post-COVID specials and what they say about these characters, about time, about what the show has been doing across all these years. That's a lot of ground. We have time. There's no rush. And if you'd like to subscribe before we go any further, now would be a good time for that. It really does help. One more thing worth saying before we actually get going. A lot of South Park content online takes the shape of 10 things you didn't know, or Cartman's most evil moments, or the episode that got banned and why. Those are all fine formats. There's a lot of good content built around them. Tonight isn't that. Tonight is slower and less structured than that. We're going to approach these ideas the way you'd approach a conversation with someone who spent a lot of time thinking about something, not in a rush to deliver information, but interested in actually sitting with it. Some of the things we'll cover are well documented in the show's production history and confirmed by the creators. Some of them are interpretations, some of them are theories that the show has neither confirmed nor denied. I'll try to be clear about which is which as we go. The show itself, for what it's worth, has always been resistant to being pinned down. Parker and Stone have given interviews over the years that contradict each other, or contradict the show, or offer multiple explanations for the same creative decision. The 6-day production cycle the show runs on, whereby an episode goes from concept to broadcast in roughly 1 week, which is almost miraculous given standard animation timelines, means that a lot of the show is reactive, intuitive, not the product of the kind of long arc planning that more structured, serialized dramas allow. There are things in South Park's lore that feel planned. There are things that feel discovered. And there are things that seem, looking at them now, like accidents that turned out to be ideas. We're going to spend time with all three kinds tonight. Before we actually begin, and I really am about to begin in just a moment, let me quickly introduce you to the 4 characters we'll be spending most of tonight with, in case some of you have a looser relationship with the show than others. This won't take long. Stan Marsh is the closest thing the show has to a protagonist. He's Trey Parker's self-insert. Essentially, Parker has confirmed that Stan is based on himself. His parents are named Randy and Sharon, which are the actual names of Parker's parents. His dad is a geologist, which is what Parker's father was. Stan is the everyman. The one who usually has the most grounded reaction to whatever madness is happening. The one who, when things get genuinely terrible, tends to be the character who looks at the camera with an expression that says, "I can't believe this is what's happening right now either." Kyle Broflovsky is Stan's best friend. Jewish, quick to anger, the group's designated moral conscience. The one who argues that things matter when everyone around him has decided they don't. Kyle and Stan's friendship is the emotional backbone of the show, and the episodes where it strains or breaks are consistently among the most affecting. Kyle and Cartman's ongoing conflict, which has been running since season 1, is the show's other sustained relationship, and in some ways its more philosophically interesting one. Kyle consistently believes that things are worth being outraged about. Cartman consistently believes that things are worth exploiting. They are, in a very real sense, 2 different philosophical positions sharing a classroom. The episodes where they briefly cooperate on something tend to be the darkest, because when Kyle's moral energy and Cartman's strategic brilliance point in the same direction, the outcome is usually genuinely terrible for someone. Eric Cartman is the one you probably already know. He is 8 years old, enormously selfish, capable of racism and manipulation, and schemes of a complexity that has no business being in the hands of a 3rd grader. He is also very funny and has, across the show's run, become one of the most discussed characters in animated television. We'll spend a whole section on him tonight, and Kenny McCormick is the one we're starting with. The one in the orange parka, the one who died, right? Let's go. Kenny McCormick, for the first several seasons of South Park, had a very specific role. He died, that was the job. He wore an orange parka with the hood pulled so tight around his face that you could barely make out his features, and when he spoke, whatever he was saying came out as an unintelligible, muffled mumble that you could more or less interpret if you were paying attention and had a reasonably good understanding of what an elementary school boy might plausibly be saying in any given situation. He was the poorest of the 4 boys. His house was smaller, his parents drank more. The neighborhood he lived in was clearly on the less prosperous side of South Park. He didn't drive the plots the way Stan or Kyle or Cartman did. He was just there, in the parka, part of the group. And then most weeks he died, hit by a truck, struck by lightning, crushed beneath something large and falling, consumed by something organic, immolated, vaporized, impaled. The methods were genuinely creative, and the show seemed to enjoy finding new ones. But the shape of it was always identical. Kenny dies in some horrible fashion. Stan Marsh says, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." Kyle Broflovsky says, "You bastards." And then the next episode, Kenny is at the bus stop in the orange parka, completely alive. And nobody mentions that he died. Not Stan, not Kyle, not Cartman, not any adult in town. No one. The event simply hasn't happened as far as the show's world is concerned. For years, the first 4 or 5 seasons at least, this was played purely as a running gag, a recurring joke that the show trusted the audience to understand as a joke. There was no explanation, there was no in-universe acknowledgement. Kenny just died and came back over and over, and the comedy came from the repetition and from the variations in method, and from the cheerful indifference with which the show moved past each death. And then Kenny died in a way the show wasn't playing for laughs. Season 5, Episode 13, which aired on December 5th, 2001, is called Kenny Dies. The title is not a reference to the running gag. In the episode, Kenny is diagnosed with a terminal illness, muscular dystrophy. He goes to the hospital. The other boys deal with what's happening in different ways. The episode is written with a seriousness that was genuinely unusual for South Park at that point. Kenny dies at the end, as the title promised, and the episode doesn't have a punchline waiting on the other side. He stayed dead for the rest of Season 5 and most of Season 6. The show brought in Butterscotch as an alternate 4th member of the group. It was a strange period, tonally, the show making a point, or testing something, or just following the logic of what it had done. Kenny came back quietly at the end of Season 6 without fanfare or explanation, alive and in the orange parka, and things more or less went back to the way they'd been. But the permanent death didn't feel permanent, even at the time, because the running gag had always implicitly suggested there was something strange about Kenny's situation. And starting around Season 13 and 14, the show began to make that strangeness explicit. This is where the Mysterion storyline comes in. The Coon and Friends trilogy, which runs across episodes in those seasons, follows the boys as they form a superhero team. Each of them picks a costume and a name, and Kenny becomes Mysterion. Now, within the show, most of the boys' superhero identities are fairly obviously children playing pretend. They have names and costumes, and they take the whole thing seriously in that way children do. But there's no actual suggestion that they have real powers. Mysterion is different. Mysterion's power is that he cannot die. Not as a joke, not as a pretend superpower that doesn't actually come up. Within the story of the Coon and Friends episodes, as Mysterion, Kenny tells his friends plainly that he has been killed many times. He explains that every time it happens, he wakes up alive and comes back, and that no one ever remembers it happening. He says this calmly and with a kind of exhausted frankness, like someone explaining something they've tried to explain before to people who kept not believing them. His friends don't believe him. So Kenny, standing right in front of them in his Mysterion costume, pulls out a gun and shoots himself in the head. The other children are devastated. They're screaming, they're crying. They can't process what they've just seen. And then the next morning, Kenny wakes up in his bed, gets dressed, goes to school, and sees them. Not a single one of them has any memory of what happened. I want to stay with this for a moment because I think it's quite easy to slide past it when you're watching. Here's a child who has died repeatedly in ways ranging from absurd to genuinely graphic, and every time he comes back alone with the knowledge of it. Nobody around him carries the experience. Nobody asks about it. Nobody checks in. He carries every death by himself, and then he goes back to normal because what else is there to do? You go to school, you sit in the same classroom, you eat lunch at the same table. The tragedy of it isn't the physical act of dying, though that's obviously unpleasant in the extreme. The tragedy is that it's completely invisible. Kenny's experience is real, the show confirms this, but it leaves no trace in the world that anyone else can perceive. He is the only witness to his own suffering every single time. The show then does something else with this, which is explain where the curse comes from. Kenny goes to his parents and confronts them about something called the Cult of Cthulhu. If you're not familiar with H.P. Lovecraft, the early 20th century American writer whose work created a mythological system called the Cthulhu mythos, the broad strokes are: Cthulhu is an ancient cosmic entity, incomprehensibly large and old and indifferent, the kind of god that makes the universe feel extremely cold and the individual human life feel approximately meaningless. Cults dedicated to such entities tend, in Lovecraftian tradition, to attract people who've had enough of ordinary human meaning systems and are ready to embrace something more nihilistic. Kenny's parents attended a meeting of a cult dedicated to Cthulhu. They joined because there was free beer. That detail, which the show delivers absolutely straight-faced, is the most South Park explanation for cosmic horror that I can possibly imagine. The biggest consequence of any character's life in the entire show, the thing that shapes Kenny's entire existence and condemns him to an eternity of dying and returning and suffering alone, was caused by someone being offered a free drink and saying, yes, it's funny. And if you think about it past the laugh, it's genuinely bleak. Cosmic horror accidentally invited in because the entry cost was cheap enough. There's a sequence near the end of the Coon and Friends arc that I think is probably the most quietly devastating piece of television South Park has ever produced. And I'm including everything we'll talk about tonight in that assessment. Kenny has died again. He's been reborn again. Nobody remembers again. And so, exhausted in a way none of his friends can perceive, Kenny tells them he's tired and wants to go to bed. Then he shoots himself in front of them one more time. His friends are horrified. They'll forget by morning, they always do. Cut to Kenny's house. His mother jolts awake, clutching her stomach, crying out in pain. She says, "It's happening again." And then she's placing a newborn in a tiny orange parka into a crib. She turns to her husband and says, with something that sounds genuinely like regret, that they never should have gone to that stupid cult meeting. That line rewrites every Kenny death that came before it. I want to bring in a philosophical angle here, because I think it's the right one. The philosopher John Locke, 17th century English, best known for his work on political philosophy, but equally important in theories of personal identity, argued that what makes you the same person across time isn't your body. Bodies change constantly. The matter composing you at 40 is largely not the matter that composed you at 4. What makes you continuous across time, Locke argued, is psychological continuity, memory, experience, the connected chain of consciousness that links who you are now to who you were before. By that account, Kenny's situation is philosophically peculiar in a very specific way. Kenny himself retains his memories. He knows he's died, he knows he's come back, he knows nobody around him remembers. The thread of his own consciousness is unbroken from the Lockean perspective. He is the same person across his deaths. But no one else's thread connects to him across those events. From the perspective of everyone he knows, each Kenny who shows up after a death could, in theory, be someone entirely new. They just don't know it because there's nothing to indicate the difference. What makes someone real to the people around them by this reading is not their existence, but the traces they leave in other people's memory. And Kenny leaves none. Is this the show's intended reading? Probably not consciously. South Park isn't writing Lockean philosophy seminars. But the situation the show created around Kenny, accidentally or not, has this philosophical shape to it, and I find it worth sitting with. There's also a piece of fan theory around Kenny worth mentioning here, which I want to handle carefully because the evidence is genuinely ambiguous. At some point in the show's run, the exact episode is debated, Cartman received a corneal transplant that may have included Kenny's eye. The theory holds that this created some kind of partial perceptive connection between Cartman and Kenny's situation. Flashes of awareness, moments where Cartman seems to register something the other boys can't. It's never been confirmed by the show's writers. It's never been explicitly denied. And given that Cartman is, across the show's run, the character whose awareness of his own situation seems to operate on a different frequency to everyone else's, it's an interesting thread. Is this confirmed? No. Has it been denied? Also no. And that's what makes it worth holding. What gets me most at the end of all of this isn't the philosophy. It's something simpler. For 20-something seasons, Kenny died as a joke, and the joke was funny. And then the show, quietly and without a grand announcement, turned the joke into something with real weight and real darkness. Now, when you go back and watch the early episodes, every death carries a different quality. Not funnier, different. You know something the other characters don't. You know what each death costs. That's a strange thing for a running gag to become. But it's what happened. The tragedy of Kenny McCormick is not the dying, it's the loneliness. There's actually a further layer to the Kenny mythology that I want to mention before we move on because it connects to how the show handles the character in its later seasons in a way I find genuinely interesting. When Kenny's curse was revealed through the Mysterion storyline, it changed the texture of every previous episode retroactively. But it also changed the texture of the episodes that followed. Because once the show had established that Kenny's deaths were real and that they cost him something real, it stopped killing him quite as often. The deaths became less frequent from season 14 or 15 onward. And when they happened, they landed differently, heavier. The repetition that made the joke work, the thing that made each death funny by sheer accumulation, had been interrupted by the weight of the actual mythology. The show couldn't go back to treating Kenny's deaths as purely comic after revealing what they actually meant for him. What it replaced that with, in terms of Kenny's character contribution to the show, is something I find more interesting. Kenny as the group's realist, the one who, by virtue of having experienced things the others haven't, tends to perceive situations with more accuracy. He doesn't say much, the parka still muffles everything, but there's a quality to his presence in scenes that feels different once you know his backstory. He's the one who's been through the worst of it and came back over and over and kept showing up anyway. There's a philosophical concept called amor fati, love of one's fate, that comes from Nietzsche, the 19th century German philosopher. The idea is that the highest form of affirmation available to a person is not the acceptance of their circumstances, but the genuine embrace of them. Not tolerance, not endurance, actual love for the shape of one's own life, including its suffering. It's a demanding idea, and I'm not sure Nietzsche fully lived up to it himself, but it's a compelling one. Kenny, read through the lens of his mythology, is a character doing something adjacent to amor fati without having chosen to. He didn't pick his curse. He didn't decide that dying repeatedly and being forgotten would be his defining experience. But he keeps showing up. He keeps putting on the orange parka every morning. He keeps going to school and sitting with his friends and being present for whatever the episode requires of him, even knowing what's probably coming. That's not affirmation exactly. The show is too honest to frame Kenny's situation as one he's embraced. But there's something in the ongoing quality of his participation in the world that feels like more than mere endurance. I might be reading too much into this. South Park isn't writing Nietzschean philosophy seminars any more than it's writing Lockean ones. But the situation the show created for Kenny and the choice they made to have him keep showing up in it, there's something in that worth noticing. Before July 2001, Eric Cartman was a particular kind of South Park character. He was obnoxious, he was selfish, he was capable of bigotry directed at most possible targets, and he held grudges longer than any reasonable 8-year-old should. He threw spectacular tantrums when he didn't get his way. He lied constantly and without apparent guilt. He manipulated the people around him with a skill that seemed too sophisticated for his age. He was, by any reasonable measure, a genuinely unpleasant child, but he was manageable. He was the spoiled brat of the group, the character whose awfulness was the source of comedy rather than genuine dread. He could be outsmarted, he could be humiliated, he could be made to sing and dance and make a fool of himself. The awfulness had a ceiling, and everyone, including the audience, knew where the ceiling was. And then Season 5, Episode 4 aired, July 11th, 2001. And the ceiling went away. Scott Tenorman Must Die has the highest IMDb user rating of any South Park episode ever broadcast, 9.6 out of 10, which puts it among the highest-rated individual television episodes on that platform. I want to be careful not to lean too hard on ratings as a measure of anything except attention. But in this case, the number does tell you something. A lot of people watched this episode and it did something to them. Not the funniest South Park episode, not the most satirically ambitious. The one people point to when they're trying to explain what Cartman actually is. The setup is small, almost insultingly small, given where it ends up. A 9th grader named Scott Tenorman sells Cartman some of his pubic hair for $10, telling the younger boy that buying pubic hair counts as reaching puberty. Cartman, who has been eager to be the first of his friends to grow up, goes along with this. He's then informed by Stan and Kyle that pubic hair grows naturally and cannot be acquired through purchase. He's been had essentially for $10. He goes back to Scott Tenorman and asks for his money back. Scott refuses, then Scott escalates. He manipulates Cartman out of an additional $6.12, lures him to a non-existent event in a distant city, makes him perform a humiliating little dance, and then, as a finale, burns the money in front of him rather than returning it. Cartman has now been publicly humiliated in front of most of the school. Scott has burned his money. And Cartman has at this point been outwitted at every single turn by an older boy who seems to enjoy the exercise. Cartman responds to this the way Cartman responds to things. He schemes, he plots, he tries several approaches that fail, he trains a pony to bite Scott's genitals and that doesn't work. He tries a crude revenge plot involving Radiohead and that gets exposed. He keeps getting beaten. And with each defeat, something shifts in his effect. The tantrums recede and something quieter and more purposeful takes their place. The actual revenge, which takes most of the episode to build, involves a chain of events so carefully engineered that it bears walking through. Cartman writes a letter to the band Radiohead, Scott's favorite band, claiming that there's a terminally ill boy dying of anal cancer who would love to meet them before he goes, and that boy's name is Scott Tenorman. He arranges a chili cook-off. He constructs a situation in which Scott's parents, going to a farm to rescue a pony they've been warned about, will encounter a farmer known for shooting trespassers. Cartman factored in specifically that his friends Stan and Kyle would warn Scott about the pony, and he factored in that Scott, warned about the pony, would send his parents rather than going himself. Scott's parents are shot dead. Their bodies are processed into chili. Cartman serves Scott the chili at the cook-off. Scott eats it. And then Cartman tells him what he's just eaten, in front of Radiohead, who arrive precisely as planned, and having been told Scott is dying of cancer, proceed to mock him for crying about it. Cartman cups Scott's tears in his hands and says, and I'm quoting directly here because the line is genuinely important, "Let me taste your tears of unfathomable sadness." And then he does. Parker and Stone have talked about this episode at length in various commentary tracks and interviews. They've called it a milestone. The moment when Cartman went from a little shithead to the most evil kid in the world, in Parker's phrase. They've been open about the debates they had during production, specifically about the question of whether Cartman could be the one to directly kill Scott's parents. The writers felt very strongly that he could not. Scott's parents had to die through a chain of events Cartman had designed, but the final trigger, literally in this case, had to be pulled by someone else. Cartman couldn't be the one to do it himself. That detail is philosophically interesting because it represents a specific moral intuition that there's a meaningful distinction between orchestrating harm and directly causing it. Whether or not you agree with that distinction, and philosophers and legal systems have gone back and forth on it for a very long time, the fact that the writers insisted on it tells you something about how carefully they were thinking about what they were actually making. They weren't just writing a shocking scene for shock's sake. They were thinking about culpability. Then, 9 years later, in season 14, episode 6, the episode called To Harm One, which aired April 21st, 2010, the show retroactively darkened everything. Scott Tenorman returns. And he reveals, having apparently been researching his own revenge on Cartman in the years since season 5, that his own father, Jack Tenorman, a fictional Denver Broncos player, had previously had an affair with Cartman's mother, Leanne. Jack Tenorman was Cartman's biological father, which means that in the events of Scott Tenorman Must Die, Cartman arranged the murder of his own father, had him processed into chili, fed him to his own half-brother. The show waited 9 seasons to tell us that. 9 years of Cartman doing terrible things to the people around him, and all of it was downstream of a revenge scheme whose full shape Cartman himself hadn't understood when he executed it. He thought he was punishing a bully who'd taken his money. He was doing something far more profound and far more terrible. And he didn't know. What do you do with that philosophically? There's a long tradition in moral philosophy of debating the relative weight of intentions versus outcomes. The consequentialist position says, look at what actually happened. 2 people are dead. One of them was Cartman's father. The harm is the harm, regardless of whether Cartman knew the full picture. The intentionalist position says Cartman intended to harm Scott, not to murder his own father, and that matters for how we assess the moral weight of what he did. Most serious moral frameworks end up being some combination of these, and most serious moral frameworks struggle with the edges. Cartman's case is an edge case. He intended harm. He caused it. He also caused harm he didn't intend and couldn't have anticipated. And then, when the full picture emerged 9 years later, he didn't process it in any visible way. He moved on. The show has given Cartman, across its run, occasional moments where something that looks like genuine feeling breaks through. Episodes where you catch a flash of what might be loneliness, or shame, or something that could be read as fear, before Cartman rebuilds his particular kind of armor and goes back to being himself. These moments exist. There are fans who've spent years cataloging them and arguing about what they mean, whether they suggest some real interior life in the character, or whether even these moments are manipulation. Here's the thing I keep returning to, thinking about Cartman. Most actual evil, not the theatrical villain variety, but the ordinary kind that exists in the real world, doesn't look like someone who knows exactly what they are. It looks like a person who is convinced at some level that what they're doing is justified, that the people they're hurting had it coming, that the standard rules don't apply to them in quite the same way they apply to others, for reasons that seem self-evident to the person doing the rationalizing. Cartman has never encountered a situation that didn't offer a special exemption for Cartman. He's the most consistent practitioner of exceptionalism in a show full of people making exceptions for themselves. And the show keeps watching him do it. Season after season, episode after episode, we keep watching too. Which is, if you sit with it for a moment, its own slightly uncomfortable thing to notice. There's one more piece of lore worth adding here, which connects Scott Tenorman to Cartman's biological father in a way the show was building towards across multiple seasons. When Cartman eventually learns in 201 that Jack Tenorman was his father, his reaction is not guilt. It's not grief. It's a kind of icy recalculation, the recognition that a variable he hadn't accounted for had been in play the whole time. And then he moves on. Parker and Stone have sometimes described Cartman as operating without a fully functioning conscience, not as a clinical designation, but as a character observation. He can simulate conscience. He can perform remorse when it's useful. But the internal break that most people experience when they're about to cause serious harm to someone, that doesn't seem to be wired in for him in the ordinary way. And yet, there are episodes that complicate this reading, and I want to give them their due. Season 9, Episode 14, The Death of Eric Cartman, involves the other boys deciding to collectively ignore Cartman after he does something particularly terrible. And Cartman, convinced that he's died and become a ghost, goes through what looks, from the outside, like a genuine attempt at making amends. He apologizes to people he's wronged. He tries to fix things, and while the episode resolves in a way that undercuts any easy reading of this as sincere growth, the moments themselves don't feel entirely like performance. Something is happening. Similarly, there are episodes built around Cartman's relationship with his mother, Leanne, that carry an emotional weight that doesn't resolve cleanly into manipulation. Leanne Cartman is, by most readings, the single largest contributing factor to why Cartman is the way he is. She has indulged him completely, consistently since before the show began, and the consequences of that indulgence are most of the show. But the relationship between them isn't purely transactional from Cartman's side. There are moments where he seems to genuinely love her in whatever version of love is available to him. What would it mean for a character like Cartman to genuinely love something? What does love look like inside a psychology built around self-interest? The show never fully answers this, and I think it's right not to. An answer would make him smaller. The uncertainty is the interesting part. Whether that makes him a monster or a product of his environment, or just an especially extreme depiction of something common. A person who's optimized so thoroughly for self-interest that the optimization has become their entire personality is a question the show doesn't answer, probably wisely. The answer would make the character smaller. Actually, let's take a small breath here. We've been in fairly dark territory for a couple of sections now. Kenny's curse, Cartman's psychology. These are not light topics, even when they're wrapped in the comedy the show uses to deliver them. Stretch if you need to. Adjust whatever needs adjusting, and when you're ready, we'll head somewhere a bit more colorful, where the question is still philosophically serious, but the scenery is considerably more pleasant. In the autumn of 2007, South Park made a 3-part episode that won an Emmy Award and asked, in the middle of a story about terrorists and nuclear weapons, an illegal bet involving Eric Cartman's anatomy. A question that philosophers have been sitting with for a very long time. If something exists only in imagination, is it real? The Imagination Land trilogy, Season 11, Episodes 10, 11, and 12, airing on October 17th, 24th, and 31st, the last one on Halloween, is the most formally ambitious thing the show had attempted to that point. 3 connected episodes, building a continuous story across 3 weeks of broadcast. Parker has said in interviews that after the first episode aired, he went in the following Thursday morning and laid out every beat of the remaining 2 episodes in a single session. He described it as one of the few times he stepped back from the writing board on a Thursday and had the whole shape of a story sitting there, complete. The Imagination Land trilogy won an Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program for programming 1 hour or more. But the show did not win the same category in 2011 for the Black Friday trilogy. It's the show at its most structurally confident, and it remains, I think, one of the best things South Park has ever made. The setup involves a bet. Cartman claims to have seen a leprechaun in the woods. Kyle doesn't believe him. They make a wager. If leprechauns are real, Kyle has to perform an act on Cartman that I'll leave tactfully unspecified, and if they're not, Cartman owes Kyle $10. In the Imagination Land trilogy, most of the boys in Cartman's class follow him into the woods. The leprechaun turns out to be real. It's in a hurry. It was sent to warn of a terrorist attack, and the chase has made it late. Before Kyle can respond to having lost the bet, a strange man appears and invites the boys onto his balloon for a journey to Imagination Land. Imagination Land is exactly what it sounds like. It's a dimension containing every being ever imagined by human consciousness. The good ones live on one side of a great barrier. The evil ones live on the other. The mayor greets the boys. Hundreds of familiar characters crowd around them. The good side of Imagination Land is bright and gentle and inhabited by figures from stories across many centuries and cultures, fairy tale creatures, heroic archetypes, beloved childhood characters. And then a group of terrorists blow themselves up in the middle of it. The terrorists destroy the barrier between the good and evil halves of Imagination Land. Evil creatures, monsters, villains, nightmare figures from humanity's most disturbing imaginings pour through. Characters are killed. The military, aware that something has gone catastrophically wrong in the collective imagination of humanity, begins debating whether to nuke the whole dimension to stop the contamination from spreading. Meanwhile, Butters' Stotch has been left behind. He's alone in Imagination Land, and the Council of Nine, Aslan the Lion, Gandalf, Glinda the Good Witch, and a few others finds him. And they tell him something extraordinary. Because Butters is real, a living human being rather than imagine one, he has a power none of the imaginary characters possess. He can imagine things into existence. He is, in the most literal available sense, a creator. The most innocent, most frequently grounded, most persistently overlooked child in South Park is the one being told by Aslan and Gandalf that the fate of the entire world's imagination rests on his ability to believe hard enough. I want to sit with the Butters detail for a moment before we get to the philosophical core of the trilogy, because I think it's one of the show's quieter pieces of character writing. Of all the children in South Park, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny, Jimmy, Craig, Tweak, whoever else is available, the one chosen as the creative power capable of rebuilding a universe is Butters. Not the cleverest, not the most assertive, not the one with the most experience of difficult situations, the one who still believes. The one who, despite everything the show has put him through, hasn't developed a protective coating of cynicism. More on Butters later tonight, but that detail belongs here, in the context of a trilogy about whether imagination constitutes reality. The philosophical argument arrives in episode 3. Kyle, who has been drawn into the military's deliberations about whether to proceed with the nuclear strike against Imagination Land, finds himself having to argue the case for not doing it. And the argument he makes is one of the most interesting pieces of writing in the show's entire run. Kyle argues that imaginary characters are real. His reasoning goes something like this: consider the impact that fictional beings have had on actual human lives. Luke Skywalker has affected more people's sense of what heroism means than most historical figures. Santa Claus organizes the behavior of hundreds of millions of children every December. Whether Jesus of Nazareth was a historical figure in the way the Gospels present him or not, his impact on the structure of human history is undeniable and immense. Bugs Bunny, Superman, Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, Sherlock Holmes. These beings don't have physical bodies, they don't occupy space in the way we do, but they act on human consciousness in ways that change how people live and think and feel. Doesn't that give them a kind of reality? They might be imaginary, Kyle says, but they're more important to most people in that room than most of the actual people in that room. It's the show making, as clearly as it ever does, an argument about the nature of fiction and why it matters. The punchline, of course, is that having publicly argued that imaginary things are as real things, Kyle now technically has to honor his bet with Cartman. He's just argued himself into it. The show is South Park, of course it goes there. But the argument itself holds up independent of the punchline. And I think Parker and Stone knew that. They wouldn't have written it otherwise. There's a philosophical tradition, sometimes described as pragmatism, and associated with thinkers like William James and John Dewey in the early 20th century, that judges the reality of things by their effects. A thing is real in this view, to the extent that it has genuine effects in the world. Beliefs matter because they change behavior. Ideas matter because they change what gets built and what gets destroyed. And by this measure, fictional characters who act on human consciousness across centuries, reshaping values, inspiring action, providing frameworks for understanding experience, have a claim to reality that many purely physical objects lack. There's something else in the trilogy that I find quietly moving, and it's the closing image of the whole thing. After Imagination Land is destroyed and Butters is alone in a void where the entire dimension once was, he imagines everything back into existence. This boy, this small, frequently humiliated, perpetually grounded boy, sits in nothing and rebuilds a universe from memory, from nothing. He's told it's because he's real, and real people can create things. Imaginary beings can only exist within the shapes they were given. And then it ends. He wakes up. His parents ground him for something unrelated. He lies back and says, "Ah, shut," and the story closes. The universe he rebuilt keeps running without him, and Butters goes back to being Butters. I don't know, I keep coming back to that image, the boy in the void, imagining and finding it quietly beautiful. The show doesn't ask you to be moved by it. It's already moved on to the next joke, but the image is there. There's one more dimension of the Imagination Land trilogy worth considering, which connects to something the show had been circling around for several seasons by 2007. The trilogy features, in its fictional landscape, characters from religions alongside characters from stories. Jesus is in Imagination Land, so is Santa Claus, so are figures from various mythological traditions. And the Pentagon's debate about whether to nuke Imagination Land involves a tangential argument about the reality of God, heaven, and hell, whether these fit in the same category as Narnia and Hogwarts, or whether they're in a different category, and how you'd even begin to adjudicate that question. The show doesn't answer this either. It uses the question to generate comedy and then moves on. But the question it's raising is a real one. What makes a belief system that structures human experience different from a fictional world that structures human experience? By Kyle's argument that things which impact human lives are real in the meaningful sense, there isn't a categorical difference. They're on the same spectrum, which is either a deeply religious observation about the reality of all human meaning-making, or a deeply irreligious one about the constructed nature of it. The show lets both readings coexist. That's South Park doing what South Park does best, raising a genuinely difficult question in the middle of something ridiculous and then walking away before you can ask it to choose a side. On June 8th, 2011, South Park aired an episode called You're Getting Old, Season 15, Episode 7, Spring Finale. And it did something the show almost never does. It ended without resolving anything, no punchline, no reset, credits and silence. A lot of people thought it was the series finale. It wasn't, but the confusion is worth sitting with because it tells you something about how the episode landed. Here's what happens. It's Stan Marsh's 10th birthday. Someone gives him a CD of the latest tween wave music, a fictional genre the episode invents as a parody of whatever was popular and overwrought at the time. Stan listens to it and discovers that it sounds to him like SHT. Not metaphorically, literally. The audio of the music reaches his ears as flatulent sounds. He doesn't understand it. He thinks maybe his tastes are changing, which is what a doctor tells him when he goes to get checked out. Your tastes change as you age. That's normal. But then he notices it isn't just the new music, it's everything. Movies sound like shti. Food tastes like shati. The experience of being in the world, for Stan Marsh, has literally become the experience of everything being waste. The doctor gives him a diagnosis: being a cynical asshole. Stan's wires have gotten crossed, the doctor says. Most people's tastes shift as they grow up so that things that seemed exciting in childhood start to seem dull. But Stan has managed to do this globally and completely. Everything he used to love now seems fundamentally worthless, and nothing new has stepped in to replace it. The comedy of the diagnosis is real, it's a funny scene, but underneath it there's a clinical observation about cynicism as an experience, not just a posture. The episode is depicting something that happens to people. The moment when the protective wryness that passes for sophistication becomes so complete that it takes everything with it. When the distance you are keeping from things you might be hurt by becomes the distance from all things. When nothing makes it through the filter anymore. Stan's friends stop spending time with him because being around him makes things worse. Kyle tells him directly that his negativity is poison, which is an honest thing for a best friend to say and also a painful one. Randy Marsh, in a parallel B-plot, is having his own version of something similar, trying desperately to stay young and relevant by performing tween wave music at a local bowling alley under the stage name Steamy Ray Vaughan, shitting himself as part of the act, because apparently that's what tween wave performance involves. Randy's crisis is played more for laughs, but it's the same shape, a man who feels the world moving past him and has no dignified way to respond. Stan's parents fight. The fights escalate. The fights become about things they'd both been carrying for a long time. His parents separate. A real estate agent puts a sign up outside the house where the family has always lived. And then the episode ends. Fleetwood Mac's Landslide plays over a montage that takes its time. Sharon and Shelley packing boxes, Randy driving a moving van away, looking back once. A real estate agent planting a sign in the front garden. Kyle coming upon a despondent Stan and then, after a moment, walking away. Stan, alone, lying on a new bed in a new apartment, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling. The credits roll with no music, no punchline, no reset. The episode just stopped. Parker and Stone have spoken about this in DVD commentary and various interviews. Parker said that they wrote the episode without knowing how to follow it. The writer's room broke for the summer, having produced a spring finale that didn't have a resolution. And the first session when they came back in autumn apparently began with Parker saying, "Now what the hell do we do?" They'd aired something they weren't sure they could come back from. The follow-up episode, Asperger's, Season 15, Episode 8, October 5th, 2011, picks up immediately where You're Getting Old ended. Stan is still depressed. He's back in the family home. Everything still looks and sounds like shh to him. The school, misinterpreting his behavior as a side effect of a flu vaccination, diagnoses him with Asperger's syndrome. Cartman mishears Asperger's as Asperger's, sees a business opportunity, and starts selling burgers that have been, I'll let you work out the detail, marinated in a distinctive way. People love them. Stan is taken to an Asperger's research center for treatment. The center turns out to be a front organization. The people inside it are not actually Asperger's patients. They are members of something called the Secret Society of Cynics, a group of individuals who have genuinely concluded that the world is deteriorating, that things are as bad as they appear to be, and that some force is preventing everyone else from noticing. They maintain functional lives by drinking Irish whiskey as a kind of chemical management strategy. When Stan drinks it, things stop looking like shtick. He can interact with the world again, he can function. And so he joins them. The Secret Society of Cynics is presented comedically. In the style of a Matrix parody, there's a shadowy organization, a leader who speaks in cryptic tones, a red pill, blue pill structure. But the underlying idea is genuinely interesting, and I want to stay with it for a moment independent of the comedy. These are people who have looked at the world and decided it really is as bad as it looks to them. Not partially bad, not bad in specific ways that could be addressed, just genuinely, fundamentally deteriorating. And their response to this conclusion isn't denial and it isn't paralysis. It's chemical management and continued participation. They drink whiskey to close the gap between what they see and what's expected of them, and then they go to work and come home and function like everyone else. They're not lying to themselves about what the world is, they're just managing the knowledge. Is that wisdom or pathology? The episode doesn't decide. It presents both readings simultaneously and leaves them running. Stan eventually reaches a kind of acceptance, a genuine one, not medicated. He decides that even if things aren't going back to the way they were, that's okay. The old life had the old things, the new life might have new things, change can be survived. This is actually quite a mature emotional arc for an animated child, and it arrives through genuine character work rather than just being announced. And then Randy pulls up in a van and announces he's reconciled with Sharon and everything is going back to normal. Sharon explains to Stan in what sounds like maternal warmth, but is actually one of the show's most devastating lines, that sometimes people just have to accept things the way they are, even if it means remaining unhappy. That sometimes the familiar is worth more than the better. Stan's hard-won acceptance collapses. The montage runs again, everything going back to the way it was, which looked like the resolution it was, except Stan's face tells you that something is irreversible. The final shot is Stan, heading out to the cinema with his friends, pausing on the way out the door to take a swig of whiskey from a bottle he's apparently now carrying. Not recovery, not breakdown, not crisis, just Stan, 10 years old, medicated against the gap between what he sees and what he's expected to feel going to the movies. Parker and Stone have been thoughtful in interviews about the autobiographical dimension of the two-parter. Parker framed the question behind the episodes as, how long can you keep doing this? 15 seasons of satirizing everything, treating everything equally as a target, maintaining the posture that nothing deserves to be taken seriously. At some point, does that become its own kind of trap? Does the equal opportunity wryness curdle? Does the distance from things become the loss of the ability to care about anything? The show reset and kept going as it always has. Stan's depression became one of those lore threads that lives in the background without being constantly foregrounded. But the whiskey swig is there, it's in the archive, and every time the show insists nothing matters, there's a brief flash of a 10-year-old boy in a doorway taking a drink before he can face the day. Here's a thought I've been sitting with about these two episodes that I haven't seen discussed much elsewhere. The secret society of cynics, the Matrix parody underground of people who see the world clearly and drink whiskey to survive, is presented as a fringe thing, a secret group, a hidden network of people who know what's actually going on and have organized around that knowledge, which is a familiar paranoid structure. The people who have the truth are also the ones nobody believes. But what the show does that's unusual is refuse to validate the paranoid structure. The secret society of cynics might be right about the world deteriorating. They might be wrong. The show doesn't decide. The underground network isn't a revelation, it's just another coping mechanism, another community of people who found a way to live with what they see. The whiskey isn't insight, it's maintenance. And I don't think this is a coincidence. The show's structural choice to present the secret society of cynics as a Matrix parody isn't just a joke. The Matrix in 1999 presented a version of the same idea. The world is worse than it appears. A small group of people know this, and they use specialized computer links to toggle between the illusory world and the real one. The idea had a huge cultural impact, partly because it articulated something a lot of people already felt, that the ordinary world was somehow constructed, that there was a more honest reality underneath it that most people were being kept from. South Park's version, airing 12 years later, takes that same structure and diffuses it. The secret society of cynics aren't heroes with access to deeper truth. They're just people who see the world a certain way and have found a maintenance strategy. The whiskey isn't the red pill, it's just whiskey. The cynicism isn't insight, it's a disposition. And the structure of the Matrix parody, the dark trench coats, The mysterious leader, the underground bunker, is the joke, making visible the grandiosity of how cynicism often frames itself. We who see clearly, we who know, we who have been freed from the illusion the rest of you inhabit. South Park, through the comedy of it, is puncturing that grandiosity. Seeing the world as deteriorating doesn't make you special, it makes you exhausted, and the whiskey makes it livable. Stan ends the two-parter not having been rescued by the secret knowledge of the cynics. He ends it having reached an acceptance that the world doesn't need to look the way he needed it to look, and that he can keep going without it. And then that acceptance is taken away when the reset happens. And so he drinks. The show is honest enough to show you that the acceptance, as hard-won as it was, didn't hold. That the structures around Stan, his family, his friends, the town, reasserted themselves, and the moment of genuine progress got absorbed back into the status quo, which is often how it actually goes. The moments of genuine clarity don't always survive contact with the ordinary world. They need to be maintained, built on, made into something structural rather than just experience once. Stan didn't get the chance to do that, so he drinks instead, and the show keeps going. Now, let's move to something a bit lighter. Well, lighter adjacent. The Randy section involves a man performing tween wave music while soiling himself at a bowling alley, so, your mileage may vary. Let's take a slightly gentler turn and talk about Randy Marsh for a while. Randy is, and I find myself more convinced of this the more the show continues, the most interesting adult character the show has ever written. Partly because the show seems to find him endlessly compelling to write, partly because of the strange arc he's taken from a background character to the de facto center of the show in recent seasons. And partly because of what the show is actually doing with him underneath the spectacle of his various catastrophes. Randy started as context, Stan's dad, a geologist. As I mentioned when introducing the characters, Parker based Stan on himself. His real parents are named Randy and Sharon. His real father was a geologist, which means Randy in the early seasons is essentially a fairly direct portrait of a parent. Present, mildly embarrassing, occasionally wrong, but essentially trying. And then gradually, across something like 10 or 12 seasons, Randy became something else. The show started using him as the primary vehicle for satirizing adult male behavior specifically. Not adult behavior generally, there are plenty of adult women in South Park who do terrible things, but the particular behavior of men in a certain age range who cannot quite accept that they have entered the phase of life where they're supposed to be the settled one. Stan Marsh plays Guitar Hero with an intensity meant for teenagers. He gets into physical brawls at youth sports events. He develops obsessions that are inherently inappropriate for a man of his years. He performs tween wave music at a bowling alley. He starts a marijuana farm because he wants Integrity and ends up running a small cannabis corporation that does business internationally. The Integrity Farms arc, which begins in season 23 in 2019 and continues across subsequent seasons in various forms, is probably the most sustained piece of Randy character work the show has done. Randy moves the family to rural Colorado. He's going to grow weed. He's going to get away from the noise and the technology and the performative culture of modern life. He's going to live simply and honestly. The word integrity, his pronunciation of integrity, becomes the thing he claims to be pursuing. What the arc actually shows is Randy using the language of authenticity to run a business while avoiding the label. He grows cannabis and sells it. He expands, he finds new markets, he cuts deals that compromise the principles he announced when he started. At one point, he's making deals with Chinese buyers, which given the show's broader history with China is a joke that lands on multiple levels. He's not opting out, he's participating in the same commercial structures he claimed to be leaving, just with nicer scenery and better marketing copy. The satirical target is reasonably clear. The person who announces a principled retreat from capitalism while remaining entirely within it, who frames every business decision as a value statement, who has turned the aesthetics of integrity into a brand. This is a recognizable type. The show makes it recognizable. But here's the thing about Randy, and this is what I think makes him more interesting than a simple satirical target. The show doesn't reduce him to the caricature. He has moments, usually accidental, usually the result of bumbling into something rather than engineering it, where he gets something right, where his refusal to self-consciously manage his image opens a door that someone smarter and more calculated would have kept closed, where his genuine commitment to whatever he's currently committed to, however misguided, produces something real. He loves his family. It's clear and consistent across all his antics that he loves his family. He's just extremely bad at expressing that love in ways that are useful to the people receiving it. There's a philosophical concept from Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith, mauvaise foi, which describes the act of deceiving yourself about your own freedom and your own choices. You can do this by pretending you have no choice when you actually have one, or you can do it by pretending to be something fixed and definite, a role, an identity, a type, rather than acknowledging that you're always in the process of choosing who to be. Randy is in bad faith almost constantly. He's always becoming something new. He's always performing the next version of himself. He can't sit still inside an identity long enough to notice what it costs him. Every new Randy, Randy the rock musician, Randy the marijuana farmer, Randy the social activist, Randy the whatever's next, is a temporary escape from the fact that he's a middle-aged man with a family and a job and a past that includes most of the same things everyone else's past includes. But the show doesn't condemn him for it, and I find that interesting. Most shows would be clearer about whether Randy is admirable or pathetic. South Park keeps both possibilities alive simultaneously. The Randy-Stan relationship, which becomes more prominent in later seasons, has a specific quality to it that I think is the most honest thing the show does with both of them. They're the same person at different ages. Stan watches Randy with the particular kind of mortification that comes from recognizing something of yourself in someone you're not yet ready to acknowledge as a mirror. Randy watches Stan with something. The show doesn't quite articulate it, possibly pride, possibly the sense that Stan is doing better than Randy did at that age, without understanding how or why. They're two versions of the same man moving in opposite directions, and neither of them is willing to say that out loud. That's a very human dynamic. It's not often depicted in animation with as much fidelity as the show manages. Parker has said he genuinely enjoys writing Randy, that he finds the character interesting to inhabit, and it shows. Randy has an aliveness to him, even in episodes where he's at his most ridiculous, that a lot of animated characters don't quite achieve. He feels like a person rather than a type, even when the show is using him primarily as a type. Maybe that's all there is to say. Randy Marsh is a man who keeps becoming things, and the show keeps watching him do it, and somehow that watching has accumulated into one of the more honest portraits of adult male restlessness in contemporary comedy. Maybe the point isn't that Randy is admirable or pathetic, maybe the point is that he's both, which is closer to how people actually are than most character writing allows. One thing I want to add here about Randy that often gets lost in discussions of Tegrity Farms and his louder misadventures. There are episodes built almost entirely around Randy's specific competence. He is, the show occasionally reminds you, a geologist, an actual scientist with an actual area of expertise. And there are moments, quiet, easily missed, where his understanding of something technical saves the day, or at least makes a situation less disastrous than it would have been otherwise. He's not uniformly incompetent. He's incompetent at the things that are legible and visible to the people around him, and quietly capable at the things that don't read as impressive, which is, again, closer to how most actual people work than cartoons usually depict. Here's a thought I want to add before we leave Randy, because it connects to something the show has done more in recent seasons. Randy Marsh has, across the Tegrity Farms arc specifically, become a lens through which the show examines a very particular modern fantasy, the fantasy of stepping off the conveyor belt. The idea that there's a version of contemporary life that is more real, more honest, more structurally sound than the one most people are living, and that the path to it involves going back to something simpler and more physical, growing things, working with your hands, making something rather than just processing information or managing other people. That fantasy has enormous appeal. It's been enormously appealing for as long as industrial society has existed. Thoreau wrote about it in 1854. The Back to the Land movement of the 1970s was built around it. Every decade produces its version. And the version South Park is satirizing in the Tegrity Farms arc is specifically the modern iteration where the fantasy is simultaneously genuine. Randy really does seem to want something more real and immediately commodified, because that's what happens to all authenticity in contemporary capitalism. The thing that was supposed to be the alternative to the commercial system gets absorbed into it. The farm becomes a brand. Tegrity becomes a product. What I find interesting about the show's treatment of this, and I want to be careful not to make the show sound more pessimistic than it is, because the Tegrity Farms arc is genuinely funny across most of its run, is that it doesn't present Randy's desire as wrong. He really does want something. The desire for something more grounded, more connected to physical reality, more honest than the average suburban professional life. That's a real desire, and the show takes it seriously enough to spend several seasons examining what it looks like when you actually try to live it rather than just fantasizing about it. The answer, at least in Randy's case, is that you end up running a small cannabis corporation and doing deals with parties you weren't expecting to deal with. And the tegrity you wanted becomes the word you put on the packaging rather than the practice you live, which is not nothing. The desire persists even as the practice fails to match it. But it's a considerably less redemptive story than the fantasy suggested. There's a Sartre line that keeps coming back to me when I think about Randy, which is that existence precedes essence. The idea being that a person has no fixed nature they're supposed to fulfill. They exist first, and then they choose and create what they are through their choices and actions, which is liberating, but also means that you're always responsible for who you are, and that the gap between who you want to be and who you actually are is always entirely your own creation. Randy wants to be someone with integrity, and Randy keeps choosing in small, concrete ways not to be that person. Existence precedes essence. The farm is real. The integrity is still pending. Here's a fun detail about the Randy Marsh character that has nothing to do with philosophy, but that I think is worth sharing before we move on, because it illustrates something about how the show constructs these characters. Randy Marsh's occupation, geologist, is one of the few adult jobs in South Park that the show actually knows something about. Trey Parker's real father was a geologist, which means that on the rare occasions when the show depicts Randy doing something geologically plausible, it's because Parker has an actual frame of reference for what that would look like. The geological expertise is real, in other words. Everything else Randy does is extremely not real. But there's a specific slice of his character that's grounded in actual knowledge of a person Parker loves. That kind of detail, real thing embedded in a mostly fictional context is part of what gives South Park's long-running characters their texture. They're built from specific people and specific memories. Randy is not just a type. He's a type with a father inside it. And that probably is why Parker never seems to tire of writing him. Let me talk about Man Bear Pig. This is something I've been thinking about for a while, and it's one of those threads in the show's history that I find genuinely philosophically interesting, separate from the comedy of it, because it's one of the very rare cases in which a major television show publicly revised a position it had staked out. And the way it did it, and what it cost, and what the person on the other end of the original joke said when it happened, all of that is worth sitting with. On April 26, 2006, South Park aired an episode called Man Bear Pig. Season 10, Episode 6. Former U.S. Vice President Al Gore appears in South Park, desperate to warn everyone about a creature called Man-Bear Pig. Man-Bear Pig, Gore explains, is half man, half bear, and half pig. He is extremely serious about this. He keeps saying he is super serial. He is serial in a way that transcends ordinary seriality. Nobody listens to him. And not entirely because Man-Bear Pig sounds implausible. It does sound implausible. But South Park is a show where implausible things are constantly real. Nobody listens to Al Gore specifically because he keeps presenting Man-Bear Pig in a way that seems more about Al Gore's need to be taken seriously than about Man-Bear Pig itself. The warnings are inseparable from his own relevance. He's making movies starring himself. He's giving presentations to rooms he isn't sure want him there. He's hunting Man-Bear Pig. The peril is real in his telling, but it's also somehow subordinate to the project of people acknowledging that he's perceiving something important. The episode ends with Man-Bear Pig not being real. The whole thing was, in the show's framing, an elaborate product of Gore's vanity and his need to be the person who saves the world from something. The context for this, an inconvenient truth. Gore's documentary about climate change had been released that same year. It was a major cultural event. It had won an Academy Award. Parker and Stone were not expressing a clear position on climate science in the Man-Bear Pig episode, but they were expressing something about the theatrical dimension of how the warnings were being delivered. The sense that the urgency was at least partially performance. That being the person who sees what others don't was part of the appeal for Gore as a character. Man-Bear Pig was the vehicle for that observation. Super serial became a catchphrase. The episode became one of the most referenced in the show's catalog. And for about 12 years, the cultural legacy of Man-Bear Pig was a gentle but persistent mockery of environmental alarm. Gore has said in interviews that for a long time after the episode aired, almost any public appearance he made would involve someone asking him about Man-Bear Pig. It followed him. He thought Parker and Stone were nihilists, funny nihilists, but nihilists. People who decided everything was equally pointless and mocked it equally and didn't actually believe in anything enough to change their position. Then, in October and November of 2018, Season 22 of South Park aired 2 episodes. The first is called Time to Get Cereal. The second is called Nobody Got Cereal. Man-Bear Pig is back. And this time, Man-Bear Pig is real, genuinely, viscerally, frighteningly real. He shows up and starts killing people. He's enormous and terrible and unstoppable. And the damage he causes is treated with the same dramatic weight as any genuine threat the show has ever depicted. The boys, who dismissed Al Gore's warnings all those years ago, have to find him and ask for his help. And Al Gore, his character in the show, requires them to apologize before he'll do anything. They say the words. They apologize. South Park's own child characters say on screen, "We're sorry, Al Gore." I want to be precise about the debate around how to read these episodes. There are reasonable people who argue that Man-Bear Pig was never intended as a one-to-one metaphor for climate change specifically, that making Man-Bear Pig real doesn't necessarily constitute the show saying, "We were wrong about climate change, Al Gore was right." The Man-Bear Pig episode was as much about Gore's personality as about climate science. And the Season 22 episodes don't make Gore's personality more admirable. The argument holds some water. But here's what I think is undeniable, regardless of how you read the metaphor. In 2006, the show made an argument with a specific name target, using a specific named creature to embody a specific type of alarm. In 2018, it revisited that argument, made the thing it had dismissed real and catastrophic, and had its own characters apologize to the person whose warnings it had mocked. That is not a nothing. Al Gore's response to the Season 22 episodes is, to me, one of the most genuinely touching pieces of real-world context attached to any South Park storyline. He said he was impressed. He said he didn't know Parker and Stone, and he'd assumed from the Man-Bear-Pig episode that they were nihilists who didn't believe in anything enough to revise a position. And then they did. He said the apology in the episodes, the fact that the character said, "We're sorry," was something he hadn't expected from them. The capacity to look at something you said publicly and clearly and memorably and say, "We got that wrong," or at least more complicated than we made it look. That's genuinely rare. It's rare for individuals. It's rare for institutions. It's almost unheard of for a major television franchise that has built part of its identity around the posture of being unwilling to be wrong about things. South Park's equal opportunity mockery philosophy creates a specific trap, which is what I want to draw out here. If you commit to mocking everything equally, you've implicitly committed to not having positions, or at least to not holding them publicly enough that revising them would be noticeable. The philosophical appeal of equal opportunity satire is that it puts you above the fray. Nobody can accuse you of favoritism. Nobody can say you're carrying water for one side. You're just pointing at everything and noting that it's all a bit absurd. But this position has limits. The most obvious limit is, what do you do when the evidence points in a direction? What do you do when one side of a debate turns out to be more right than the other? At that point, continuing to mock both sides equally isn't neutrality, it's avoidance. It's choosing the comfort of your own posture over the responsibility of updating. The Man-Bear-Pig reversal is the show noticing that and acting on it. Not loudly, not with a press release or a special episode or a formal mea culpa, just by making the creature real and having the character say sorry and moving on, which is possibly the most honest way to do it. You correct the record and you keep going, and you don't make the correction itself into a performance. I find that elegant. Not noble exactly, the show is still South Park, it's still mocking everything in sight. The apology lands in the middle of a comedy about a demonic man-bear-pig killing people. But the correction is there, it's real. And Al Gore, the actual human being who was the target of the original joke, said he was moved by it. That detail keeps staying with me. The real person whose warning was mocked, saying he didn't think the people who mocked him were capable of this kind of revision. And then they were. I want to be careful not to overstate what the Man-Bear-Pig reversal represents. It doesn't mean South Park has become earnest. It doesn't mean Parker and Stone have abandoned their default skepticism about political movements and their theatrical dimensions. The season 22 Man-Bear-Pig episodes are still funny. They're still South Park. The apology is embedded in comedy. It's not a separate thing from the comedy. It's woven into it, but the correction is there. And I think there's something worth sitting with in the idea that you can make a correction in the register you've been working in. You don't have to abandon your mode in order to revise your position. The revision can be part of the work. The apology can be funny and still be genuine. Those things are not mutually exclusive, and South Park demonstrated that in a way that I found genuinely interesting when I first sat with these episodes side by side. 12 years between the original joke and the acknowledgement that something more complicated was going on. That's a long time to carry a thing before putting it down. Let's pause here for a moment. We're a little past the halfway point tonight, roughly speaking, and I want to give things a chance to settle. If you've been following along, you've had quite a lot of information through these sections. If your mind has been drifting pleasantly around some of it without fully committing to any one thread, that's also fine. That's the way a lot of the best late-night thinking works. You don't hold on to everything, you just let the ideas pass through, and something sticks by morning without you having tried to make it stick. The sections from here, Butters, the equal opportunity question, the post-COVID specials, are a bit more reflective than the earlier ones. Less about specific events and more about what those events add up to. If anything we've been through tonight has had you thinking about something else entirely, something from your own life that resonated, that's not a distraction. That's the whole point, right? Butters. Leopold Stotch, everyone calls him Butters, started as a background character. He was just a boy in the crowd, blonde, small, in a green jacket, standing somewhere in the background of scenes without any particular assignment. He got a name around season 3. He got an actual character across the seasons that followed. By season 5, with Kenny temporarily written out, Butters had become the de facto 5th member of the group. And he is in a show that is built on cynicism and populated almost entirely by cynics, the character who has refused to become one. That sounds like a simple thing. It isn't. Every significant character in South Park has developed, over the course of the show's run, some kind of defensive mechanism. Stan's mechanism is the world weariness we spent time with in Section 4. Kyle's is moral exhaustion, the fatigue of being the one who keeps objecting when no one around him is listening. Cartman's protection is the absence of empathy, which means nothing can get to him in the first place. Kenny's situation is his own separate category entirely, as we've already talked about. Randy's mechanism is constant reinvention. Even the minor characters have their versions of it. Butters has a different relationship to the show's cruelty. He bounces back. He gets used, he gets betrayed, he gets grounded by parents who respond to his gentleness with something that, at its worst, borders on contempt. And he returns to something close to his original state. Earnest, willing to believe the best of people, a little confused about why things keep happening to him. The Professor Chaos material is worth talking about here because I think it's one of the most philosophically revealing things the show has ever done with Butters, even though it's usually discussed purely as a comic bit. In season 6, after Butters has been told he's no longer needed as a Kenny replacement, the group is getting Kenny back, thanks, you can go. Butters processes his rejection in a way that initially looks like rage. He decides to become a villain, he constructs a silver foil helmet with horns, he declares himself Professor Chaos. He is going to make everyone pay. His acts of chaos include moving all the silverware in his house to inconvenient locations, trying to flood the world by leaving a garden hose running, painting a mural that he presents as being by a famous artist. None of these constitute meaningful villainy. None of them even constitute meaningful mischief. An organization that monitors supervillain activity dismisses him without concern. He is not registering on their radar. And the philosophical question is, why doesn't it work? Cartman, who is by any reasonable measure a significantly worse person than Butters, manages to cause genuine harm constantly. He's been doing it since season 5 at least. What does Butters have that makes villainy unavailable to him? I think the answer has to do with attention. Genuine harm, the kind Cartman specializes in, requires a specific kind of emotional disconnection from the people you're affecting. You have to be able to register the person in front of you as a means to your end rather than as a subject with their own interior life. Cartman can do that. He has always been able to do that. It's the thing that makes him effective at what he does. Butters, for all his attempts at supervillainy, cannot stop paying attention to the people around him in the full sense, cannot stop registering them as people, and so his chaos keeps resolving into something harmless. Because when he gets close enough to actually cause damage, he sees a person, and the damage becomes impossible. The show has tested this quality of Butters repeatedly and with increasing force. Season 5, episode 14, Butters' very own episode, opens with a narrator saying, "This episode is based on a true story, gets it," which is the kind of thing South Park never does. The episode follows Butters trying to help his father plan a surprise for his mother. In doing so, he follows his father and discovers that his father is visiting an establishment for men, which his father was not supposed to be visiting. Butters tells his mother what he saw, meaning to help, because telling people things is what you do when you care about them and want things to be okay. Butters' mother drives him to a lake and tries to drown him by running the car into the water. Butters' mother blames the attempted drowning on a Puerto Rican. The episode is a parody of Susan Smith, who in 1994 falsely blamed a black man for the disappearance of her children after she drove them into a lake herself. It is the bleakest episode the show has ever made with its most cheerful character. And it ends with Butters' parents covering everything up and Butters forgiving them because he believes they love him and he can't bear to think otherwise. That ending is either a portrait of genuine childlike grace, of a capacity for forgiveness that most adults have lost, or a portrait of a child so comprehensively committed to believing in his parents that he can't fully register what they just did. The show allows both readings simultaneously and doesn't adjudicate between them. Here's what I think the show is actually doing across the full arc of the Butters character. Cynicism in South Park, as we talked about in Section 4 with Stan, is repeatedly shown to be a response to disappointment. It's what you become when the world consistently fails to match what you needed it to be. And you decide to stop being surprised by the gap. It's a protective coating, and protective coatings do protect you from something real. Butters has been given a world that is just as disappointing as the world everyone else inhabits. His parents treat him as an inconvenience. His friends use him for schemes and then discard him. The show puts him through situations that would, for most characters, accelerate the development of protective cynicism. But Butters doesn't develop it. He keeps showing up season after season in something close to the state he started in. That's either the saddest portrait in the show of someone who can't learn, or the most hopeful portrait of someone who has found a different way to survive. I lean towards hopeful, cautiously, with full awareness that the show keeps testing that reading quite hard. We mentioned briefly in the Imagination Land section that Butters is the one chosen as the creative power capable of saving the dimension, specifically because he's real, because he believes, because he hasn't acquired the insulating distance that would make him unable to imagine things into existence. The Imagination Land trilogy makes explicit what the Butters character has always implied, that the thing the show's world keeps treating as weakness, his failure to toughen up, his inability to become cynical, is actually the rarest and most powerful quality anyone in South Park has. He's the only one who can still make things. Whether that makes him the show's most tragic character or its most quietly heroic one is a question I've been sitting with for a while now, and I don't think I've landed on a final answer. I'm not sure the show has either. There is one more Butters arc worth mentioning, which lives in seasons 12 and 13. The episodes involving Butters performing as a female entertainer named Margarine. As a result of Cartman's schemes, are usually discussed in terms of gender and identity, which is a valid reading. And the show handles those aspects with more nuance than you might expect from a crude comedy. But what strikes me about the Margarine episodes is how genuinely Butters inhabits the performance. He doesn't resist it. He doesn't feel humiliated by it in the way another character might. He just does the thing he's been asked to do as well as he can because that's what Butters does. And then when it ends, he goes home and gets grounded. Because something always happens, and Butters always gets grounded. It's the most reliable story beat in the show. Here's the thing about Butters that I keep coming back to. The show is almost entirely about how the world shapes people, how exposure to bad things, to disappointing things, to people who don't behave the way you need them to, produces defenses. Cynicism, manipulation, detachment, Randy's constant self-reinvention, Stan's depression, Cartman's complete absence of empathy. These are all, in different ways, responses to the world being less safe than you'd want it to be. Butters has been exposed to all the same things and has produced none of these defenses. Either the show is suggesting that some people are just constitutionally unable to develop defenses, that they keep getting hit and keep staying soft, which is sad, or it's suggesting that Butters has chosen on some level not to close off, not to develop the armor, not to learn the lessons the world keeps trying to teach him about how dangerous it is to be open. I lean towards the second reading, but I hold it gently, because the show doesn't make it easy to know. There's one more element of the Butters character that I want to leave you with, which is his relationship to punishment. Butters gets grounded constantly. It's the show's most reliable structural beat involving him, whatever he's done, however innocent his motives, whatever chaos has occurred around him through no fault of his own. his parents ground him. The grounding has become so automatic that it reads less like a disciplinary response to specific behavior and more like a baseline condition of his existence. He's a child who is frequently in trouble with his parents. That's who he is. And what's philosophically interesting about this is that the grounding never seems to change anything. Butters emerges from each grounding period essentially unchanged, still cheerful, still willing to believe the best of people, still showing up for whatever the episode requires of him. The punishment doesn't produce the intended effect. It doesn't make him more cautious, more guarded, more protective of himself. It doesn't develop the cynicism that punishment is supposed to cultivate. There's a philosophical question in developmental psychology and moral philosophy about what punishment is for. The obvious answer is deterrence. You punish someone so they don't do the thing again. But Butters keeps doing things or finding himself in situations that result in punishment regardless of how many times he's been grounded. The deterrent isn't working if deterrence is the goal. But maybe deterrence isn't the only goal. Maybe the grounding is about something else for Butters' parents, about reasserting order, about expressing frustration, about managing their own anxiety in a way that has more to do with them than with him. The punishment is real. The cause and effect it's supposed to produce isn't. And Butters somehow keeps showing up the next episode without resentment, still wanting to help, still being willing to be led somewhere by someone who will almost certainly get him in trouble. That's either a profound failure to learn or a profound refusal to let what's been done to him determine who he is. I keep coming back to the second one, the one that makes Butters not a victim of his circumstances, but someone who has, in his own way, made a choice about what to carry. From the beginning, Parker and Stone have been consistent about one thing. South Park mocks everything equally. No sacred cows. No groups that are off limits. If you're going to make fun of Christianity, you have to be willing to make fun of Islam. If you're going to go after conservatives, you have to go after progressives. If you take a swing at one celebrity, you have to be willing to swing at everyone. The show's entire editorial stance across nearly 30 years has rested on this principle of equal opportunity. It's a coherent position. There's something genuinely principled about it and something artistically honest about a show that actually follows through, that doesn't have a constituency it's quietly protecting while loudly satirizing everyone else. A lot of shows claim to be equal opportunity and are not. South Park, for the most part, really is. That's worth acknowledging. But it creates a problem, and the show's own history illustrates that problem in ways that I think are worth examining carefully. Start with Muhammad. In 2001, Season 5, Episode 3, Super Best Friends, Muhammad appeared in South Park. He was depicted as one of several historical religious figures in a kind of superhero team. Muhammad's power was fire. The episode aired without controversy. The depiction was neither particularly reverent nor particularly disrespectful. It was a South Park treatment of religious figures, which is to say it was irreverent across the board and didn't single anyone out for special treatment. Nobody made threats over it. 5 years later, in 2006, Season 10, Episodes 3 and 4, Cartoon Wars Parts 1 and 2, the show returned to the question of depicting Muhammad, this time explicitly. The plot involves Cartman trying to get Family Guy canceled for a planned episode that would depict Muhammad. Kyle argues for creative freedom. The show is making a point about the unequal application of censorship, about the fact that one religious figure was being treated differently to all others, specifically because of the credible threat of violence from extremist groups. Comedy Central partially censored the actual depiction, using black bars, which made the show's argument for it in a way the writers hadn't planned but probably appreciated. Then, in 2010, Season 14, Episodes 5 and 6, the episodes called 200 and 201, the show came back to this a third time, and this time it was the largest and most ambitious attempt the show had made. The two-parter brought back essentially every celebrity and group South Park had ever satirized over 14 seasons. all converging on the question of whether the show would finally do what it had been edging towards for years. The episodes were genuinely ambitious. They felt like an attempt to write something that earned the controversy it was generating. 201 was heavily censored by Comedy Central before broadcast, following what the production team described as credible death threats. The audio was bleeped, specific visual elements were obscured, and then, after the censored version aired, both episodes were pulled from streaming and syndication entirely. They have never been restored. 5 episodes total. Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Parts 1 and 2, 200, and 201 are unavailable on major streaming platforms. For a show that is otherwise comprehensively available, that's a significant gap in the archive. Parker and Stone responded at the time with clear frustration. They felt that Comedy Central's decision to censor the episode, and the reason behind it, credible threat of violence, had made their argument more forcefully than the episode itself could have. The show was trying to make a point about the unequal protection afforded to different targets. The censorship demonstrated the inequality so completely that the argument became almost self-evident. Here's the philosophical problem, stated as precisely as I can manage. Equal opportunity mockery, as a principle, assumes that applying the same joke to equivalent targets will produce equivalent consequences. But the world isn't built that way. Different targets have different responses available to them. One target might respond to satire with legal complaints. Another might respond with organized boycotts. Another might respond with something that requires security professionals. Equal application of the same satirical approach doesn't produce equal outcomes when the targets are not equivalent in what they can do in response. South Park found this out practically. You can commit in principle to mocking everything equally, but you cannot control what happens when you do. The show's equal opportunity commitment collided with a situation where following through had consequences that weren't equally distributed, and the show absorbed those consequences differently than it absorbed the consequences of mocking Christianity or Judaism or Scientology. Isaac Hayes leaving the show over the Scientology episode cost the show a voice actor and a fan. The Muhammad situation cost the show 5 episodes from its archive. I find that gap genuinely interesting and a little uncomfortable. The principle held, the archive didn't. Then there's China, which is a related but distinct version of the same problem. In October 2019, Season 23, Episode 2, Banned in China, the show depicted Randy attempting to break into the Chinese entertainment market while simultaneously depicting human rights abuses in that country. The episode features Winnie the Pooh as a stand-in for Xi Jinping, which had become a piece of dissident iconography in China because a meme comparing the two had been circulating and being suppressed for several years. The Chinese government banned South Park. Not just that episode, the entire franchise. Every episode, every clip, every search result. The show was scrubbed from Baidu, Weibo, Bilibili, and every other major Chinese digital platform. The ban was comprehensive. Parker and Stone's public response was to release a statement parodying the corporate apology form. They wrote something to the effect that they welcomed the Chinese censors into their homes and hearts, that they would be happy to conform to whatever standards were required, and that they looked forward to many years of residuals. It was a pointed joke about the many actual studios and entertainment companies that had apologized to China, or simply preemptively self-censored to avoid the situation in order to maintain market access. The joke landed. It was a good joke. And it was also a demonstration of something real. They could make this joke because Comedy Central and Paramount, the entities behind the show, were willing to absorb the cost of losing Chinese distribution. Not every creator is in that position. Not every studio would make the same calculation. The show's ability to follow through on its equal opportunity commitment depends, in part, on the economic circumstances of the people behind it. Here's the thing I keep returning to when I think about this section of South Park's history. Is there such a thing as genuinely neutral satire? Parker and Stone would likely say they're outside the camps they mock. equally critical of all positions, equally unwilling to align. But the act of choosing what to satirize and how much time to spend on a particular target, and what angle to take on it, all of those choices reveal a perspective. You can't choose to satirize everything equally and actually achieve total neutrality, because the act of choosing, of emphasizing, of spending 22 minutes with one idea versus another, is itself a stance. South Park has a perspective. It's a specific, identifiable one. Libertarian-leaning, suspicious of expertise and authority and group sentiment, deeply resistant to earnestness, convinced that most things people treat as very serious are actually not as serious as that. That's not neutrality, that's a philosophical position. An interesting one I find compelling in a lot of its specific applications and limiting in others, but it's not outside the game it's playing. The Muhammad situation and the China ban don't disprove the equal opportunity commitment, but they do illuminate the difference between a principle and a practice. Equal opportunity satire is the principle. What actually happened when the show followed through on it was something more complicated and less symmetrical than the principle suggests. There's one more piece of this that I want to mention, which is the Isaac Hayes story. Because it's the case where the show's equal opportunity commitment collided most directly with someone the show actually knew and valued. But before we get to that, I want to say something about the 5 unavailable episodes as a philosophical object in themselves, which I don't think gets discussed enough. When people talk about censorship and free expression, the conversation tends to focus on the act of censorship, the decision, the reasons, the consequences for the people who made the thing. What gets discussed less is what the gap looks like from the outside, what it means to have a body of work with absences in it, what the unavailability of 5 episodes out of 338 does to the shape of the archive. Because the archive of South Park is almost comprehensively available, the show's official website has hosted free episode streaming for years. Comedy Central archives have been remarkably complete. The move to Paramount Plus brought essentially everything with it. The show is not a hard thing to find, except for those 5. Those 5 sit in the archive like cleared spaces, gaps where the completeness should be. And the philosophical interest of those gaps, to me anyway, is that their existence is itself a piece of information about the show's history. It tells you something about where the equal opportunity commitment encountered something it couldn't fully absorb. The gaps are evidence. They mark the specific place where the principle met a consequence it couldn't manage, and the consequence won. Not permanently, maybe. The show is still there. The arguments it made in those episodes are still documented and discussed. But the episodes themselves are gone from the mainstream accessible archive, and that's a different kind of loss than never having made them at all. Isaac Hayes voiced Chef Juro McElroy, the school's chef, one of the most beloved characters in the show's first 9 seasons. Hayes provided a warm, soulful presence in the show that genuinely anchored some of its most emotionally sincere moments. He was, by all accounts, deeply valued by Parker and Stone, and they were genuinely fond of him. In 2005, Season 9, Episode 12, the show aired an episode called Trapped in the Closet. The episode satirized Scientology, depicting its beliefs, its celebrity membership, and its management practices in the show's characteristic fashion. The episode was sharp and critical, and, for most observers, consistent with the show's approach to all religious and quasi-religious movements. Hayes was a Scientologist. He did not leave the show immediately. He stayed through Season 9 and gave no public indication of a problem. But in early 2006, he resigned from the show, citing bigotry and intolerance in how South Park treated religion. He specified religious satire as the issue. Parker and Stone's response was immediate and pointed. They noted, essentially, that Hayes had been present and seemingly unbothered for years of South Park satirizing Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Mormonism, and many other religious traditions. He had not previously raised concerns about the show's treatment of religion. The specific concerns arose only when the show turned its attention to Scientology. Parker and Stone said something to the effect of, "We're sorry if Isaac is upset, but he was okay with us making fun of every other religion for 9 years." The show killed Chef in the season 10 premiere, using audio splice from previous recordings to give the character a final appearance. It was, by design, an ungracious exit. The character dies in the most gratuitously horrible way possible. Parker and Stone have never fully apologized for how they handled it, and the fan response at the time was somewhat divided, but the Isaac Hayes situation is a clear demonstration of the equal opportunity problem from a different angle. The principle of equal opportunity mockery has social costs when it's applied to things that real people you have relationships with hold sacred. The principle doesn't protect you from those costs. It just clarifies what the costs are. Hayes left. The relationship ended. The principle held. Whether that's admirable or simply cold probably depends on where you're standing. There's something worth sitting with in the gap between the principle and how it felt to the person on the other end of it. Parker and Stone were applying their equal opportunity commitment consistently. They were right in principle that they'd been satirizing everything for 9 years without Hayes raising concerns. The principle is coherent, and yet Isaac Hayes, who had given the show something genuinely valuable in Chef's presence, who had been part of the show's identity for nearly a decade, felt differently about it than the principle might suggest he should. He left, and the show killed his character. That's not an argument against the principle. It's an illustration of what principles cost when you follow them through. Principles have costs. Good principles have costs too. The equal opportunity commitment cost the show Isaac Hayes. The Muhammad commitment cost the show access to 5 episodes and, for a period, the sense that some of its most ambitious work was genuinely available to its audience. Principles that have no cost aren't being tested. South Park has had its principles tested repeatedly and has mostly held to them. That's worth acknowledging, even while noting the specific ways it's looked when they've been applied. And here's the thing I find genuinely interesting about all of this philosophically. South Park's equal opportunity philosophy has produced, across its run, a show that is simultaneously one of the most offensive and one of the most principled things on television. Those two qualities coexist. The offensiveness isn't incidental to the principledness, it's the evidence of the principledness. A show that committed to mocking everything equally and followed through on it even when it was costly, produced a record of going after everyone, which is, by the measure of the principle, exactly what it was supposed to do. Whether the costs were worth it is a question each person has to answer for themselves. But the commitment was real, and the record bears it out. In November 2021, South Park showed us something it had never quite shown before. It showed us these characters grown up. The Paramount Plus specials post-COVID and post-COVID, The Return of COVID, were released on November 25th and December 16th, 2021, respectively. They're set roughly 40 years in the future. The exact date is a bit flexible, but we're talking about a version of 2061 or thereabouts. In this future, the COVID-19 pandemic lasted far longer than it did in our reality. The world has reorganized itself around that extended disruption in ways that feel like a dark extrapolation of what the early pandemic years suggested might happen. And the boys, Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Eric Cartman, Kenny McCormick, Butter Stotch, are now in their late 30s or mid-40s. They are adults. The bus stop is far behind them. What the specials give us of who they became is offered in glimpses rather than full portraits, which is probably right. The specials have a lot of plot to run through, and the character observations live in the margins. But the margins are quite interesting. Stan is living alone in rural Montana. He's working remotely. His home is quiet in a way that doesn't feel entirely peaceful. He's drinking, though the show handles this lightly. He has the particular quality of someone who has carefully arranged their life to minimize the number of things it's possible to be hurt by. And the arrangement is working, mostly, at the cost of a fairly narrow existence. He's Stan Marsh at 40, which is to say, he's the logical endpoint of everything that happened, and you're getting old and ass burgers. The trajectory that started with the whiskey swig and continued. Kyle is a government bureaucrat. He's working on something COVID-related, maintaining some kind of public health function. He's wearing a suit. He's the one who organizes the reunion, which is very Kyle, the person who keeps the moral register, who insists on people showing up, who maintains the obligation to the group even when the group has dispersed. He seems tired in the specific way of someone who has been doing the responsible thing for a long time without anyone particularly acknowledging it. Also very Kyle. Cartman. This is the one I keep coming back to. Cartman is a rabbi. He has a wife, a loving, devoted wife who appears to genuinely adore him. He has 3 children, and he seems, to all appearances, happy. Not performing happiness, not manipulating people into believing he's happy for some ulterior motive. Actually, genuinely settled and content in a way he never was as a child. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I want to be honest that I still don't know quite how to read it. The obvious reading is that Cartman grew up, that the specific horrors of his childhood self mellowed with time into something livable, that whatever was driving his behavior was a product of developmental circumstances rather than something fixed in him. People change. Adults are not always a logical continuation of their childhood selves. That's a hopeful reading, and it's available. But there's a darker reading sitting right next to it. Cartman, as a rabbi with a loving family, could be the most successful manipulation he's ever run. A life constructed from the outside in, built to look like the right life, performing all the right roles, possibly doing all of that with genuine skill and without anything that you'd recognize as genuine love underneath. The show doesn't rule this out. It doesn't tell you whether what you're seeing in Cartman is real change or excellent performance. It just shows you a man with a family and asks you to decide. And then there's Kenny. Kenny McCormick, the character who died in nearly every episode for the first 5 seasons, who died in various creative ways across many seasons after that, who was established as cosmically cursed to die and be reborn forever, who could not permanently die no matter what was done to him, is dead in the future timeline. He died of COVID. And in the post-COVID specials, he stayed dead. His name comes up in the past tense. There's grief around it, not performed grief, not comedy grief, just the plain fact of absence that people talk around in the way they do when someone is gone. And the loss is old enough to have settled, but still real. The friends are gathering in part because he's not here, and because that's the kind of thing that pulls dispersed people back together. The show handles this quietly. Nobody makes the joke. Nobody says, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." Nobody expects him to show up next week. He just isn't there. What I keep returning to about this, connecting back to what we talked about in section 1, is that Kenny's deaths across all those seasons were never witnessed in a way that gave them weight. Nobody remembered. Nobody grieved. He always came back. His suffering was invisible. The post-COVID specials give him, in the future timeline, the one thing his curse had always denied him. A death that counted, that people felt, that left a real absence in the world. He got to be remembered. That's the thing the curse prevented all those years. He finally got to be remembered. The timeline resets as the timelines in these specials always do. The boys go back to being children. The bus stop is there. Kenny is dead during the events of the post-COVID specials. But the grief in the specials doesn't disappear from the audience's memory when the canon resets. You can't unknow that in one version of this story, Kenny's friends sat in a room and felt his absence. And there's something worth saying about Kyle in the post-COVID specials, which connects to what makes him such a consistent character across the show's entire run. Kyle is the one who organizes the reunion. Kyle is the one who insists the group has an obligation to each other, even now, even after 40 years. Kyle is the one standing in a government hallway in a suit, still caring about things, still trying to get people to do what's right. That's who Kyle has been since season 1. He's been the moral urgency of the group, the one who argues that things matter when everyone else is letting them slide. Stan's cynicism, Cartman's amorality, Kenny's cosmic detachment. Kyle has been the one pushing back against all of it for 30 seasons, getting it wrong sometimes, getting it right more often, getting exhausted and coming back anyway. Seeing adult Kyle still doing this, still in his suit, still sending emails, still arguing that the group should gather, is either a portrait of someone who never changed or a portrait of someone who found something worth staying consistent for. The show, true to its nature, leaves that ambiguous. But it's a recognizable Kyle, a tired one, still him. I find that quietly moving. That in the 40-year jump, with everyone else transformed or diminished or made unrecognizable, Kyle is still Kyle. The show gave him a suit and put him in a government building and kept everything else exactly the same. Maybe that's the joke. Maybe it's not a joke at all. There's also Butters in the future timeline, which I want to mention briefly. Adult Butters has become, through an extended joke about NFTs and cryptocurrency, a kind of technology evangelist whose arc in the specials is largely comic. But even here, the character maintains something of the original quality. He's enthusiastic. He believes in what he's doing, whatever it happens to be. He's still paying attention to the people around him in the way Butters always pays attention to people. It doesn't look like wisdom from the outside, but it's recognizably him. The post-COVID specials are part of a broader shift in how South Park has worked in recent years. 7 Paramount Plus specials have been released as of early 2026 alongside reduced regular episode counts, 5 or 6 per season in recent years, down significantly from the 14-episode runs of the show's middle period. The longer format has given Parker room to do things that a 22-minute episode can't sustain. The End of Obesity special from 2024, for example, is a reasonably serious piece of writing about the pharmaceutical treatment of weight that wouldn't have worked compressed into half an hour. The extended format seems to have given the show something it needed. Room to let ideas develop without rushing to the punchline. Room to let character observations sit for a moment before moving on. Room in the post-COVID specials to actually sit in the grief of these people having grown up and apart from each other in the ways that people grow up and apart. And then, of course, the reset, back to the 4th grade, back to the bus stop. What I keep thinking about sitting with the post-COVID specials and what they do is that the reset isn't just a storytelling convenience. It's a choice that's been made every time, a choice to not let things accumulate, to not let the consequences of what happened last week shape who these characters are this week. That choice has a philosophical dimension. It says something about what South Park thinks time does to people, or at least what South Park thinks is worth spending time on. Not the accumulated weight of consequences, the moment. What's happening right now? The eternal 4th grade, the eternal bus stop, the 4 kids waiting for what comes next, which has its own kind of honesty, honestly. Here's one more thing about the post-COVID specials that I want to sit with before we move towards the closing. There's a subplot across the 2 specials involving Victor Chaos, Professor Chaos, Butters' old supervillain persona, now in some kind of secure facility. Adult Butters is still, in whatever form, involved with this alter ego. The joke of it is that Butters' idea of villainy is still as mild and incompetent as it was in Season 6. Victor Chaos is not a threat to anyone, even now, even as a middle-aged man. He's still Butters underneath it. But the fact that the show chose to bring that particular thread into the future, that of all the things they could show us about adult Butters, they chose to show us that he's still trying, in his hopeless and harmless way, to be something other than what he is, that choice says something. He still hasn't given up on the project of supervillainy. He still comes back to it. It doesn't work, and he keeps trying. That's either the most pathetic thing in the specials or the most endearing. And with Butters, those two things tend to be the same thing. I want to add a thought about the post-COVID specials as a format, because I think it's philosophically relevant to what they achieved. The specials run about 45 minutes each, which is roughly double the length of a standard South Park episode, and that extra time matters. A standard episode of South Park doesn't have the room to let a character moment sit. You establish the situation, you build the joke, you pay it off, you move on. The pace of the show is one of its defining qualities. It moves, it doesn't linger. The specials linger. They have to, partly because there's more plot to service, but also because the material they're dealing with, future versions of beloved characters, the passage of real-time grief and middle age, and the question of what these four boys became, doesn't work at the speed of a regular episode. You need the extra space for it to land. You need time for the absence of Kenny to accumulate into something real before you can feel its weight. You need time with Stan alone in Montana for the loneliness to register. Parker used that time well, I think. Not perfectly. There are moments in both specials where the mechanics of the time travel plot overwhelm the character work, and you can feel the show reverting to its comfortable mode of moving fast and generating jokes before the emotion can really settle. But the moments that do land, Kenny's absence, Cartman's family, Kyle still insisting on the reunion nobody else is sure they need, those land in ways that regular episodes almost never do. There's a version of South Park that could do this more consistently, using the longer format not just for special occasions, but regularly. The way some contemporary animated series have moved towards longer episode lengths. Whether Parker and Stone would want to make that version is an interesting question. The specials work partly because they're exceptional, because the usual pace has been suspended for something that needs more room. But the post-COVID specials prove that the show had more capacity for this kind of emotional work than the regular format allowed you to see, which is maybe the most important thing they did. The reset happened, the boys went back to 4th grade, and the capacity for the other thing is still there, waiting. For the next time, there's something that needs that kind of room. So, here we are, the end of a long evening. Let things settle for a moment. We've been a lot of places tonight, some of them surprisingly dark for a show that started as a vehicle for a talking piece of Christmas poo, and there's no rush to get to the end of it. If you drifted off somewhere in the middle of one of those sections and are only just surfacing now, that's genuinely fine. That's what the format is for. You haven't missed a conclusion. There isn't one. The sections sat next to each other and didn't build towards a payoff, and now we're at the end. I want to finish where we started, which is at the bus stop. 4 children in the snow, Stan in his blue and red hat, Kyle in his green ushanka, Cartman in his red coat, Kenny in the orange parka with the hood pulled tight. They've been standing there since August 13th, 1997. The image, 4 small figures against a Colorado winter, opens most episodes of South Park in one form or another, and it has probably been seen by more people than any other single visual from the show's 28-season history. It is the establishing image. This is where these people are. This is where they start from. What gets me about the bus stop image, the longer the show runs, is its absolute ordinariness. Whatever happened in any given episode, whether it was a Lovecraftian cosmic curse, or the complete destruction of humanity's collective imagination, or a clinical portrait of childhood depression, or an argument before the U.S. Supreme Court about whether fictional characters have rights, it started here. In the snow, with 4 kids waiting, and then it ends. And next week, they're back. The reset we talked about with Stan, the thing he raged against, the thing the post-COVID specials used and then reversed, is here too. Same bus stop. Same snow. The weight doesn't accumulate. It gets set down each week and then picked back up the next, which isn't so different from what most of us actually do. We've talked tonight about dying as a philosophical problem and about the nature of evil in a person who may not fully understand what they are, and about whether imagination makes something real, and about what cynicism costs someone who lets it in completely. We've talked about men who can't stop becoming things, and about the rare grace of changing your mind in public, and about the specific weight of remaining good in a world that keeps testing whether you can afford to. We've talked about what it costs to say you'll mock everything equally, and about the future version of these characters that One Special gave us a glimpse of before the show took it back. These are questions South Park asked in the middle of episodes about fart jokes and celebrity parodies, and small children saying things small children shouldn't know to say. That's the thing, the show asked them almost accidentally, or at least quietly enough that you could watch for years and not notice a question was being raised at all. And then one day you're watching something from season 5 or season 11 or season 15, and something in it lands differently than it did before, and you realize the question has been sitting there the whole time, waiting. The best South Park episodes aren't always the ones that make you laugh the hardest, though some of them are. Scott Tenorman Must Die is a genuinely magnificent piece of construction, and Make Love Not Warcraft is one of the funniest half hours of television I've ever watched. But the ones that stay with me are the ones that change something slightly in the background of the show, so that when you look at the bus stop image afterward, it looks a little different. Not bigger, not more dramatic, just different, like a room where someone has moved something and you can feel the change, but can't quite place what it was. Here's something I've been thinking about for a while, which I want to share before we close. South Park began as a show about children being rude. That was the pitch. That was the thing that made it a phenomenon in 1997, elementary school children using language and discussing subjects that adults assumed children didn't know about. The transgression of the expected register. Kids saying things that kids weren't supposed to know how to say. And what happened over 28 seasons is that the show grew into something considerably more complicated than that original transgression. The rudeness is still there. The crude humor is still the primary mode. But it's been accumulating all this time a genuine philosophical archive. Arguments about identity and evil and imagination and cynicism and free expression and what time does to the people you care about. An archive of questions that the show raised and then mostly didn't answer, which is, when you think about it, the most honest possible approach. The questions that matter don't answer cleanly. Stan Marsh is still 10 years old. Kyle Broflovsky is still arguing that things matter. Cartman is still scheming. Kenny is still in the orange parka. Randy is still becoming things. Butters is still getting grounded. And underneath all of that, very quietly, the show has been asking the same questions since 1997. Dressed up differently every week, in new characters and new controversies and new parodies. But the same questions. What do you owe the people around you when you're the only one who knows how bad things are? What does it take to actually be evil? And what does it take to stop being good? Whether the things we make together, the stories, the characters, the shared imaginings, have a claim on reality. What happens to a person when the world consistently refuses to match what they needed it to be? Whether you can say everything is fair game and actually mean it. Whether the future you build is the future you imagined when you started. These are questions philosophy has been sitting with for centuries. South Park found a way to ask them through talking poo and small children dying in creative ways and a man who can't stop soiling himself at bowling alleys, which is genuinely one of the stranger and more impressive things any piece of art has managed. There's more I could say, there always is with South Park. We haven't talked about the show's 6-day production cycle in the detail it deserves, the extraordinary fact that a team of roughly 70 people produces a finished, broadcast-ready episode of television in approximately 6 days, starting from nothing each Thursday morning. Parker has described writing these episodes in single sessions, sometimes landing on the whole shape of a story in a few hours, and sometimes going to air without being certain the ending is right. That speed is a philosophical statement as much as a logistical one. The show is committed to the present moment in a way that more carefully planned series cannot be. We haven't talked about Towley, who the show itself once described as its worst character. and who has a surprisingly honest addiction storyline in later seasons, episodes where the show treats Towley's substance use with a specificity and a gentleness that it doesn't often apply to things it wants you to take seriously. The fact that the vehicle for that storyline is a talking towel who wants to get high is very South Park. The fact that the storytelling underneath it is sometimes quite good is also very South Park. We'll get to some of these another time. But it is genuinely late now. Or early. The specific hour has probably moved while we've been here. I want to say one final thing before we properly close, which is about what it's like to spend a long time with a show that hasn't ended. South Park is still running, the characters are still in the 4th grade, Trey Parker is still writing most of the episodes, the bus stop is still there. And there's something about that ongoing quality. The fact that this isn't an archive we're exploring, but a living thing still adding to itself, that feels important to acknowledge as we put this down. The questions the show has been asking since 1997 are still being asked. Some of them have been partially answered by the lore we talked about tonight. Some of them haven't been answered at all. Some of them will probably be answered by an episode that airs next year or the year after, in a way that makes you go back and look at everything we talked about tonight with slightly different eyes. That's what good lore does. It keeps paying forward. And on that note, I think that's actually where we should leave it. Not at a conclusion, not at a grand statement about what South Park means or what it's been doing for 30 years. Just at the observation that it keeps going, and that the going keeps producing things worth sitting with. There's a quality to long-running things, long friendships, long projects, shows that outlast the cultural moment they started in, that shorter things don't have. The quality of accumulated context, the way anything that happens in the present gets read through the weight of everything that came before. A joke in season 28 of South Park carries with it, for viewers who've been watching since the beginning, the ghost of the same joke in season 5 and season 11 and every iteration in between. The lore is the context. The context deepens everything. That's what a long run actually gives you. Not just more content, a deeper read on every new piece of content, a richer frame for the questions the show keeps raising. And the questions, as I said, keep getting raised. Stan at the bus stop is still the same Stan who turned 10 and found everything tasted like waste. In South Park, Cartman is 8 years old and wears a red coat. Kenny in the orange parka is still carrying every death the audience has seen and every death the show never depicted, the invisible weight of an experience nobody else shares. The bus stop is the place where all of that gets set down for a moment, where the 4 of them just stand there, waiting for a bus, talking about nothing in particular. Before the episode happens, before whatever this week's catastrophe is, before any of the philosophical weight gets activated, 4 small figures in the snow. That's the image the show keeps returning to. That's the image it started with. That's the one it will probably end with when the end comes. Right now, it hasn't ended. The bus stop is still there. The snow is still on the ground. Another morning in South Park, Colorado. And here's the thing I keep coming back to when I think about why this show specifically produces the kind of attachment that makes people sit up past midnight watching it and reading about it and talking about what it means. It's not because it's the most artistically ambitious animated show. It isn't. It's not because it has the most emotionally resonant characters, though some of them are more resonant than they have any right to be. It's because it kept going long enough to become genuinely strange. Strange in the way that all long things become strange. Strange the way a friendship becomes strange when you've maintained it long enough that the person you were when you started it is someone you can barely remember. Strange the way a place becomes strange when you've been returning to it for decades, and it keeps being roughly the same place while you keep being a somewhat different person each time. South Park has been roughly the same place for nearly 30 years. The boys haven't aged, the town hasn't changed much. The bus stop is still there. And all around that fixed point, the audience has aged and the world has moved and the show has quietly accumulated this archive of questions and moments and ideas. The fixed point in the center makes the accumulation visible in a way it wouldn't be otherwise. That's worth something. That's actually worth quite a lot. It's a good place to fall asleep. South Park will still be there in the morning. The boys will still be at